Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana Amay and
Jackie Sanders. We're two art professionals sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
We talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you will be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday.
On today's episode, we are excited to have Paris Alexander with us. Welcome, Paris.
Hey, thank you so much. It's really cool to be here. You guys are doing a great job, and so I am very thankful that you were willing to let me yak.
Of course. Our paths have crossed many times in the last few years, which we'll definitely talk about on today's episode. But we're also looking forward to hear more about your professional artist journey, balancing all of the many responsibilities and hats that you wear, and establishing the City Market Artist Collective, as well as recording a bonus segment for our podcast supporters about advice for emerging artists.
Great.
Before we dive in, we like to share a little bit of your background with our listeners who may not be familiar with your work. Now, Paris, you do have a long trajectory, so bear with me. I tried to shorten it as best as I can. Here we go. So Paris Alexander studied art from early childhood, and his work has been exhibited widely in galleries, universities, and museums, with numerous public and private commissions. His work is included in many collections, including Duke University, Saks Fifth Avenue, SAS Institute, as well as those of prominent leaders, including former President Bill Clinton. His work can be found across the US and Canada, as well as several European countries and Japan. Paris is also a well-known instructor in sculpture, drawing, and anatomy. Besides teaching privately, he has been an instructor for several art councils, art nonprofits, and the North Carolina Museum of Art Outreach Program. In 2020, Paris created and founded the City Market Artist Collective, where he invited a select group of resident artists to fill a large open gallery space with a variety of artworks, including paintings, sculpture, and mixed media. The space also features a monthly guest artist exhibition, as well as workshops, demonstrations, and lectures.
And of course, that's a very formal introduction to all of the creative projects that you have, Paris. But how would you describe your artwork to someone who has never seen it before?
Yeah, I used to be kind of hesitant about getting into that because one thing that, especially when I was teaching, that I always told students about is don't get caught in that trap of, hey, I've got to do this in this sort of way. And I was taking that the advice to myself as well. I would readily describe myself as a sculptor, particularly specializing in stone, but I love to do clay. I've actually, studied fresco paint, egg temper, and a little bit of everything. I think that art is a state of mind, not just a one thing that you do and present things. I think it all encompasses your personality. So, I guess
That's awesome.
but and I think too that I do a lot of what I've really focused on in the last few years because I'm going through a little transition. So my brain just stopped for a second because I have been doing back-to-back commissions for almost 20 years now, and I've consciously decided that I want to slow down a little bit of that. I'm not passing up everything, but I really have gotten to a place where I've been very lucky, and I'm doing the type of work that I want to do. Because in the beginning, people would come to me with all kinds of stuff, and I've learned to quickly know when it's not a good fit, and so I really have focused on doing works that go out in public spaces. Having two kids, I want them someday to sort of see that legacy and what I was up to. But now I'm also sort of shifting a little bit. There's always been these things that I want to do for myself. So things might be in a bit of a transition for me.
That's the best right there. It's just that shift from, it's a balance. We need to pay bills too, right? Between commissions and what we know we can get some of those funds for. And then, of course, also balancing those projects we want to do regardless of whether they have a secure home or not yet. But I do want to ask you, perfect segue, Paris, when or where did your journey as an artist and creative professional begin? Was it back in New York or more when you moved to North Carolina? Or can you share a
Uh,
little bit more about
well, you mean from like when did I first get into art or on the professional level?
on the professional level? Like you took it a little more seriously. It wasn't just a side thing, which we all went through that at some point. It was like, this is what I want to do for sure.
Yeah. I came down south in part to work in the science environment, and I was over at Duke University actually for 10 years with the cancer research program. And the whole time that I was there, I was meeting some and taking some different courses and classes. I did 7 years of anatomy studies, and so that fire was sort of cooking away. And I can tell you that it was April of 1993 when I sort of handed in my chip at Duke and decided that I wanted to do this professionally full time. I thought I had all this money saved up. It was going to be good. I was going to launch myself into this whole sort of different career. And I quickly learned that with sculpture, and especially where I was going with stone, and well, I need to buy a forklift. I need to buy a gantry crane, and I was pretty well flat broke after a very short period of time. And but it was 1993 when I really went all in. I think that my time at Duke really helped me a lot with that, making that transition. It was very the atmosphere over there is very sort of competitive, and you got to be on your game at all time. And I took that approach to doing this. I got up every morning like 6:30, and I went to work, and I was just like cooking at it all the time. But
Yeah,
night.
there's definitely that element of the competition and that work ethic that I feel like is a tie through between so many artists that are taking it professionally. And it's definitely that entrepreneurial mindset of going all in, building the business aspect of it, and having to have that hunger and competition early on, especially when, as you were saying, you make all these upfront investments. You may not have as much of a financial cushion after investing in your business. And you have to kind of go all in and think about it. And I'm wondering, what was that like turning point mentally of knowing that you wanted to pivot into that? And what were like the first couple of projects that you worked on that it felt like maybe spurred that confidence that, okay, I can do this?
I started taking and one, I really started getting into stone. Prior to that, I was doing a lot of painting. I mean, I always did sculpture in some way, but on smaller scales. And I went crazy over wanting to learn some stone sculpture. I purchased a house when I was like 23 over in Durham, and I met this fellow up in Virginia who owned this stone quarry, and he was also a great artist, Steve Strumloff, and I wound up getting this like life-size block of stone from him, and I set it up in my backyard under like this big tarp thing. My neighbors just thought I had lost my mind. And I just started really working. I just started doing it. And then I was doing little pieces on the side, another sort of catalyst that helped. I mean, we were in a really great area for, exploring your creative processes in terms of, I remember entering like the Durham Art Guild show and the Raleigh Fine Art exhibition and some things like that as I was working. And so that started like lighting, and igniting that fire and that desire to do things, and it helps when people say, hey, that's sort of not bad. Because to me, art was always like an alternative voice that I had to express all the things that wasn't necessarily saying. I think I always tended to be rather taciturn until I got into the arts, and when you just had to learn to present yourself and talk about things and all that sort of forced me that now it's like, hey, shut up, and all that kind of stuff. But it was just doing all those type of things in the beginning that just sort of kindled that fire and made me say, I'm going forth. I would say too, there was a big, and it's reflected in my work in the sense of my brother who helped raise me for the most part was killed in an accident when I was 17. He was killed in a motorcycle accident, and that always resonated in me in the sense of what am I going to do with the rest of my life? It showed me the real fragility of life and how it can just be gone. And then also that sense of wanting to do something that I thought my brother would be proud of. So I was always sort of searching for some way to just really just try to live a life. I got real big into reading a lot as well, and the different poets as well sort of sunk into my brain, and just I think I tend to live in my own world, and I just decided to make my own world. And yeah, there happens to be some other people in it, and it just I mean, I lived a life that was so disconnected after that from everything I had known before. And it excited me. I felt alive. I felt, like no one was necessarily telling me what to do at all times.
Yeah, there's definitely that independence factor, especially I'm sure of pursuing your creative career, taking that detour out of the science world where things are very regimented and step by step and taking your own path. And I'm curious with your creative career, especially early on and even now, what do you find is that most fulfilling part of your creative career?
Uh, Boy, getting works into spots and it really has become a bit of an obsession that I think, wow, maybe someday my children will take their grandkids to and see and say, your grandpa did that, your great grandpa did that, or and all that kind of thing. Having put getting works into places that the hospitals, universities, chapels. I love some of the ones I took my kids over to the Raleigh Little Theater, and I was able to sort of point up and it was like, yeah, I did that piece up there, and things like that. That's what really pushes me along. It's just having some sort of resonance with my having some meaningful thing that I do for my kids.
I absolutely love that, and there's so many tie-ins. I mean, we could be going for a while on this, but I can definitely relate to the whole losing a family member and then questioning everything, and then just going, "What's the point?" Am I climbing a ladder to the wrong career? Or who am I working for? Or honestly, what's the point? I mean, I met not gonna go too much into this story, this is for another day, but I remember meeting, this old Irish guy while I was out on vacation who had probably 500 million jobs in his life, one of those. And the biggest takeaway from our very random conversation with me and my husband was he said, "When you work for somebody else, there's nothing wrong with that, but you're exchanging time units or life units for money. Make sure that whatever you exchange them for is worth your life because your time units or your life units are finite. They're not infinite." So, and it struck with me so much. And this happened like after I had lost my mom, and it just kind of struck with me with that idea of I need to find how to feel the most alive, and art is definitely that for me. It's that venue where it's like you can continue to be almost like a medium for something else, where you're expressing yourself, you're translating things out there that you see for other folks, and then just bringing art into their life. But it's a lot more meaningful than working a 9 to 5 for somebody else. I don't know. Not that there's anything wrong with that, because there are times when a 9 to 5 is also fulfilling, because I've been there too and it was great. But it's definitely that relationship of the art. I mean, it just comes from your heart, comes from your soul, and it's a heck of a lot more important, I feel like.
I'd like to add to that a little bit that it's not necessarily, like, hey, this elitist sort of attitude, but
Mhm.
it some of those other things weren't a good fit for me mentally. I found I tend to be upset. I tend to be just throwing myself so much in, and especially when I was at Duke, I was just working, 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 and stressing myself out. I can remember, thinking at some point, "Wow, I may if I keep up like this, I'm gonna have some mental health issues and things like that." And then I knew some people that were there that loved that environment and they thrived in that, and they certainly were. This was not just a job to them; it was their career. It's just a matter of a good fit, and I guess I'm that proverbial square peg doesn't fit good in a round hole.
Yeah, and that's definitely there's one quote I've shared on the podcast before, the one that has always stuck with me. I can definitely relate to just like going in a career no matter what direction I've gone in. And it's one of those that work ethic to where then you kind of peer your head out and you're like, wait, what am I actually working for? Like priding yourself on your work ethic and competition and getting better, better, better. But there's one quote that I heard where it's if you're deciding to climb the ladder, make sure it's leaned up against the right wall. And especially, I think there's so many points, whether it's people's professional careers, their personal journey, to where you kind of like, you stop climbing the ladder, get out of the tunnel vision, and you're like, I don't even want to be at the top of this wall. So why am I climbing it? Like, I don't like the view from up there. I want to be on that wall over there. So then you have to like climb back down and then start from the beginning, which can be nerve wracking. But I love that idea of just taking the time to slow down and say, which wall do I want to get to? Because I'll be climbing no matter what. So making sure that what you're working towards is actually worth it in the end, from what resonates with you, where your strengths are, and how you want your life to look, which I think is such a powerful thing as an artist. It's not just the work we make, but also the life that we're able to design for ourselves with all of the many facets that it takes to be an entrepreneur and artist.
Sure, sure.
Which that is a perfect segue, Jackie. So Paris, you balance a lot of responsibilities, including managing an artist collective gallery, which we'll get into in a few questions, art installations, creating your own work. You also have, like you said, you were doing commissions, so you have follow-ups with clients, all the things. How do you stay organized? I mean, we were talking about like the science side, of course, your go, go, go. And in a different way, to make it as an artist, we have to do the same thing. So do you have any tips on how you stay sane and organized?
Yeah, and I mean this sincerely. I think in a way I've become okay with not being organized. And it used to like freak me out. I need to have this. I mean, I am really, really, really bad. I haven't updated my website in 12 years. There's a certain priority that I put on things, and I would say I compartmentalize more than organized. I sort of just put things over here and just say forget about it. I'll like I love gardening. I might think I've had times when I went out there and I redid, I'm going to build this stone wall here. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And then all of a sudden, I'll get a couple of commissions, and then it'll be like 2 years later. It's like I look out in the garden. It's just like everything's dead. It's I just go sort of from one thing to the other. So yeah, I compartmentalize. I don't really organize.
Same. Oh my goodness, same. Like, yeah, I've gone exactly through the same thing. It's like my poor garden. Anyways, and that's when I tell people, please plant perennials. Not going down that path either, because they'll survive regardless of whether you're there or not. Unlike annuals, poor things. Anyways, no, I'm glad you mentioned that because that is something, and it's definitely a topic that Jackie and I like to like cover on the podcast, and also ask our guests is over time, especially for emerging artists, it's going to take them some time to figure it out. But yeah, we may be relying on apps or a paper calendar or something along those lines. So we always like to ask people like, how do you keep each thing in their own box and yeah, make sure the ball's not dropped because that can happen too.
Yeah, yeah. It's something I've struggled with at times because I really tend to stress myself out. I'm a poor sleeper, and so especially that's the way commissions have eaten at me at times because there always is some things that I've done involved committees and whole towns, and so sometimes they can take. I had some projects that took years of negotiations before things were approved and all that, and it can lead to a lot of sleepless nights and all that kind of stuff. And also it's really then hard because I'll have things like that are going on, and I'm doing one. What was happening was I'll be doing one commission, and everyone wants a time frame, and I'll sort of come back with a time frame, and then another commission that was backburnered because I remember like when I did that chapel in Chapel Hill, I did the front facade on Franklin Street, and everything seemed to go. And then all of a sudden, the Chapel Hill Historic Committee sort of came in, and so it got backburned. Well, I was supporting my family. My wife, luckily at the time was staying home with my children, and so I had to be working. So I would just take another commission. I'd start working on it, and then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, well, that approval came through, and it's like, well, all right, now do I finish this one or go back to this one? And then it's very hard to explain that to a client. They think you're just sitting around waiting for that one project and then once it gets approval, you're going to go, and I'll be like, no, actually, I've got a whole nother project now. I've got to wait to do, and that might take 5 6 months, and some people didn't take that really well, and some people were very understanding. But when it's committees, it can be really daunting to face those things. And unfortunately, endlessly, when I was doing this, one way or another, problems came up, and especially with stone. Sometimes getting stone, when I call up a quarry and order some pieces of stone, and even though to some other artists it might seem, oh, okay, you're getting 4 or 5 tons of granite or something, to these folks, that you're a peon. They're getting people who are putting up buildings of this, who are getting 800,000 tons. So, it's like a month later, I'll call up, hey, how's my order doing? They're like, who are you? Who did you talk to? And stuff like that. And so you got to go back and sort of tell people. So luckily over the years, I've made different connections with places. And now I can have a sort of bigger punch for going in and asking for a quarry to get my stuff because I'm going in with larger groups that are sort of got my back with things. But I have to pay a price for that because then when those places ask me, hey, we need you to do this or that, I got to jump for it because they're sort of making sure my stuff goes through.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of juggling timelines. And kind of going back to the commissions timeline comment that you mentioned, it is one of those things of managing expectations with clients where you're like, you put me on pause. So I almost think of it as like when you call in for customer service or something. Like if you hang up and you call back, you're like at the end of the line because the three other people that were in line, they're priority now because they didn't pause me. I need to still pay my bills. And making those relationships with suppliers is definitely a big thing. For some people, depending on their medium, they may be able to go to a local store to buy supplies, but especially when you're getting in very niche and big quantities like the stone that you're working with, connections, I'm sure, is very key to that. And with other local artists in the community too, that's one thing that I've always admired about you is your connection to the local arts community here. And from different artists to different institutions and having a history and connection with all of them. So how do you feel like you personally connect and grow with artists in our local community?
Yeah, it's been a big part of my journey is making some of those connections early on. There, and some of them have become my very best friends. Gail Lowry, Jerry Lynch, Pat Skull. I don't want to leave out some people that were I have known for 30 years, and they've been some of my best friends, and we've seen all kinds of dramas in each other's lives and things like that. And someone funny like Jerry Lynch, if you're an artist out there, you need to, and you somehow haven't heard of Jerry Lynch, she is like the artist. You know how like with the dentist, they'll say it's a dentist, and all the other dentists go to this dentist. Well, which was like the artist that everybody went to. She's such an inspiration for her just work ethic and all that. So making those connections to different artists was really a big part of coming on. Even though I never felt in competition with other artists. I was doing my own thing. I always felt very driven within my own little space and all that. But it was good to see other people. Just like I really love reading biographies of artists because they say, oh, maybe I'm not crazy. It's the same thing having other artist friends who are making all these because it sacrifices at times for certain things. I mean, you give up big chunks of your life. I'm always struck when people, I'm sure you guys hear it at Art Space because I used to hear it all the time. People come in, oh, it must be fun being an artist, and especially when it happened to have been a really awful day where it's like, yeah, we're gonna have to put that on hold for another 6 months, and I think, oh my gosh, now I got to go back and I got to explain this to such and such, and it's gonna, it's just, yeah, it's not always fun, and it's always, you don't know whether you're getting paid, you don't know whether something terrible could sort of go wrong with it all, and then even now, I think, a lot of what I'm doing over at CMAC, City Market Artists Collective, the drive was for me not to have a typical sort of gallery. One, I wanted to pick some people that I've known a long time that I could trust, and they too have become some of my very best friends. We all sort of know each other really well and what's going on with each other. And then when I added that aspect of the guest artists, I'm sort of trying to call in chits. Many of those artists are artists that I've known for very very long time, and it's been fun rekindling relationships with some of them, some people that I haven't seen in 20 some odd years, and I'll call up and say, hey, I was crazy enough to open up a gallery, and would you have an exhibition? And having some of them say yes. I mean, someone like Gail and that who's showing over there. I mean, she's works in the North Carolina Museum of Art, and so having her come in and be a guest artist and being able to call in those chits a little bit means the world to me.
I absolutely love that, and, definitely can relate to that story of the people that go, "Oh, yeah, that looks really easy, it must be fun, you get to paint all day." And, whether we like it or not, being in a public-facing studio, something that, we discuss with fellow artists as well, is that idea of there's an educational element that happens. with that conversation where it's like, let me share with you how much I actually paint. It's this much of the whole time. You know, there's emails, there's commissions, there's public art, like you said, there's committees, and do you have a mock-up? And like there's so much more that happens that the painting part is, or whatever our medium is, it's a small part sometimes, sadly, which I'm always like trying to squeeze time in and be like, no, this time block is just for making work. But I'm glad that you, you know, brought up City Market Artist Collective, which is what we wanted to cover with you next. So I have a question for you. You know, not just what inspired you to set up the Artist Collective, which of course I'm curious about, but for those folks who may not be familiar, they may not know that an artist collective is different, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, than a regular gallery. So could we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
What inspired you, and then what's the difference between that and a gallery? Regular.
Okay. The inspiration really was that I've been in the same carving studio. It's just a large warehouse space on the very edge of Raleigh. For I've probably been in that same spot for 30 some odd years, and it's an absolute mess. It's, you know, it's stone dust that thick, you know, is over every surface. And trying to bring like a client in or have a conversation with somebody, not only would it not be good, but it's sort of like a sanctified space for me. I really don't like people dropping in there and all that. It's just my go-to place where virtually nobody, I don't see anybody there ever. And so we went out looking for another spot, and I've known Mike Haken, who owns all of City Market, for 20 some odd years. He's actually purchased some of my work, and I sent him out to California. And so I started a conversation, really looking for just maybe an office space or something like that where I could sit down with a client. And somehow or another, he started saying, "Well, we've got this space," and he shows me like, you know, this is 1,200 square feet. Then all of a sudden, we're doing like 2,500 square feet and 3,000 square feet. And but it started this ball rolling. Sun has shifted. Sorry. Started this ball rolling with. Well, what could I do with a space that size? What, you know, what could I make it into? And I have had absolutely horrible experiences in galleries. I was with a number of galleries. I remember one time being in about 18 different galleries, all the way from New York down to Key West, Florida. And oh my gosh, just some absolute awful experiences. My wife and I, we used to do what we called gallery rating, where we would go. I'm giving away the inside story now, but we would just show up at some galleries, and I can't tell you how many times they would be like, "Oh wow, can't believe you're here today. We sold those three works just this weekend." And you know full well that they sold them probably 8 or 9 months before that. And then even when I went into a, you know, at a new gallery, you get like somebody who said, "Oh, I know I could sell your work," you know, blah blah. And I'd be like, "Well, here's the problem. You need to tell me when you've sold something, and not just because I'd like to get paid, but because we could refill that spot, and gee, we could all make money and make a living." uh and I had just gosh awful experiences. I mean, everything you can imagine, from galleries breaking work, from galleries. I mean, one time I walked into a gallery that I had in DC, and I didn't see a single work around in the gallery, even though they're supposed to have like 6 pieces. And then I'm like, "Where's all the work?" "Oh, the owner took them. He has them at his house." I'm like, yeah, and I call up the owner, and he's like, "Well, I have some really great parties here." I'm like, "I'm sure you do. Do you have prices on the work? You think people are going to come over your house and going to buy?" You know, it was like, it just all kinds of ridiculous nonsense. I've sort of been through, so I became very jaded about relationships with galleries. Now, on the other end, you know, I've had some great ones. Rory Parnell, who had the Mahler before it closed. I was with her for a good 5 years or so. I mean, she's a fantastic person. I've had some great experiences, but by far terrible ones. And I always wondered why I see so many artists being like, "Oh, I'm desperately trying to get into this gallery. I'm desperately trying to get into that gallery." And for me, that's when I started making a shift and like, you know, I'm not going to do the gallery thing too much. I did start saying to, you know, when someone walked up to me, a gallery owner, and they wanted, "Hey, I could sell, you know, all that work, you know, as quick as you could make it." I was like, "Well, then buy three and I'll give you five, you know, to take in at a gallery." And some would look at like, "You're insane. And then some started to do that. And then I'd be like, well, then you could sell it for whatever price that you want. But you're giving up a lot of money. Most people don't realize that the vast majority of galleries out there are now taking 50% in this area. And most people are not aware that you can go up in New York and you have galleries that are taking 75% of it. And so we're different from that. I wanted to open a place that would, one, for myself to have my own autonomy over selling work. And I thought, well, maybe we could set it up the same way for these some of these other artists that I knew. And also a big problem was doing all these commissions, and that there was no way that I could sit there and just have a gallery, and I sit there every day. That couldn't work. So I set up a situation where basically it's the artist, they have a certain number of commitments, and then they get to sell within the space. One, they got to help out with the rent, and then they have to man the place, which is a very big thing for me. If I'm pulled away from there, then I'm not making the money that sort of helps all the everything sort of flow along. So it's an artist manned gallery at all times. And I tried to do something a little different too. And I did have a little bit of dictate, and that's why I called it a collective, and it's not a co-op. But I mean, I didn't want to sit there and be like, hey, this is my gallery type of thing, because I wanted everyone to feel like they have their own dog in the fight, and I hope that they do, and I think that they feel that way. I wasn't trying to scream out from the rafters, and I think it would be a disaster if this was the Paris Alexander Gallery, because these were all, and I've got a lot of people that have really serious big careers themselves, and I went out looking for that, and I hoped that their energy, and their reaching out for clients and all that, bringing them into the space would enhance us all, and that's definitely what has happened. We've become like this group of friends who get to hang out. I was just over there yesterday, and I thought I was going in and just pick something up, and we wound up staying 4 hours all just chatting about stuff. So it's that's what I was looking to have happen, and we're lucky enough that I found the people that can help me, make that happen, and they really did. And then I added the aspect of bringing in the guest artists, like I talked about a little bit earlier, to just keep it rolling with something fresh. One, I did back to a little bit to what I was going to say was I asked everyone to let's keep this fresh. Let's keep work sort of rotating through here. Let's also not cover the walls from floor to ceiling. Let's give space to everything. I'm real big upon presentation. But the years that I've worked at ArtSpace, helping with installing and lighting and all that, I sort of put to use in there. And I want to display it as if you're walking into a museum space, that is properly, you got room between things, it's properly lit. I went crazy looking for just the certain spectrums of light, so it wouldn't change the color aspect of people's work and all that. So I think it's different on that level. I think it's different on the sense that they get to talk to the artist that actually made the work, or what I typically say, and many of the artist members there too say is, welcome to CMAC. I'm one of the artists here, but these are all my friends. And it's very true, and it really has become the place that I was really, really hoping for. Not that I haven't been some hiccups along the way.
I mean, you're still managing a lot of different personalities at the end of the day. And I'm not gonna perpetuate the whole artist or different breed, even though we can be, but um okay, that helps. That helps too with that idea of like it's structured different because like you said, in a traditional gallery sense, you may have the one owner and their team, and they're the ones that dictate everything that happens within the gallery, right? And what work they want and how much they want and how often it rotates, as opposed to it sounds like with this, like you said, it's not quite a co-op. You're still the owner and the one making the overarching decisions, but they still have freedoms within those parameters of what they can change and what they're going to exhibit. And then, like you said, I love that idea of, if an artist brings their collector over, so not like maybe like your studio, covered in stone dust. Maybe some of the artists have the same situation with their studios. So it just kind of gives them a space to show the work, to welcome a client, meet prospective collectors, who then at the same time might be like, "Hey, I love your work, but also who is that? Can you tell me more about them?" So they're helping to promote each other, and it kind of goes to that saying of rising tide raises all ships, however that one goes. Um, or like Jackie and I like to say a lot, community over competition. We're just like, hey, we're all still different, we're unique, we're distinctive, but let's work together to make this thing work. So I like that they have hate this expression, but it's applicable. They all have skin in the game, and they definitely want it to succeed as well, not just for themselves, but also for their fellow, folks in the gallery as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important that, everybody does have some big personality, definitely some big personalities in there, that you respect that, not try to squelch that. Not that, I mean, certainly none of there's people in there that you would not be able to squelch. So you just got to let them have their thing within a certain parameters, and everybody sort of gets those same sort of parameters. And there's another monetary aspect that I tried to set up that's an advantage in the sense of, and how I presented it to them was, look, trying to get a space where you have storefront, walk-in traffic, proper lighting, and all this, and then you want to have a workspace too. That's become a very, very difficult thing to put together in downtown Raleigh. So one of the main draws that I spoke to each one of these people when I was asking to come be part of this was that, hey, this lets you off the hook for your workspace. You can then get a workspace anywhere, and believe me, you can get a much larger space just on the edge of town, or out of town or something, or maybe even at home. I don't have the possibility of working at home because it's just too industrial a mess. But some of the artists do, and some of the artists there do have then studios at home. So they lessen that aspect of their monetary commitment, because they're able to have their work represented somewhere on a regular basis without having to do all the stuff like you do in a typical gallery. But then you don't have to pay the big money for having enough space to also work there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one thing we've talked about a lot on the podcast and with other artists at Art Space is how that idea of having a community facing studio does shift your creative practice in a way. Cause like in a sense, it can be a storefront in your own like little gallery because they come into your studio, they see completed pieces, but there is also an element of exposure, both from meeting clients and people that walk in, but also sometimes you have a work in progress that you really don't want people's feedback on yet. And when you're in a studio that has a big window and no ceiling, you're like, I really don't want other energy impacting this creative space. And so there's so many benefits to having a public facing studio, but that is one thing also of sometimes almost honoring that privacy and that creative sanctuary that you have to really just focus on the work. Like you were saying, not having it on display, just having that solitude with your practice is super powerful too. And trying to find spaces that are both a gallery and then maybe like a private workspace, it's very hard to come by. And especially as you said, in downtown Raleigh, you're gonna pay a pretty penny for it and take on a lot of risk. So being able to isolate it, but still have a wonderful, well lit, beautiful space to bring collectors and show your work when it is out of the studio phase is really good too. And that idea also of being the type of gallery and type of space that you wanted as an artist. You've shared very generously some of the pros and cons of being represented by a gallery. And I'm curious now, as the gallery owner of CMAC, what are some of the biggest challenges you faced or like realizations you've had? You've mentioned a couple of managing other artists and collaborating on ideas from a pros and cons standpoint, but what are some of those realizations that you've had maybe from the larger art space in our community?
Yeah, well, one thing was opened up in the last month of 2019. Literally just that way we got in there just at the holiday, and
Perfect timing.
yeah, because guess what came around the corner? 3 months later was COVID, and
I didn't
boy,
hear about that. What was that all about? I don't know. I kind of missed that.
yeah, I mean, my God. So trying to deal with, there were a lot of restrictions put on things, and even the governor at times, since it wasn't an essential business, we were forced to close and things like that. And then, with some of the civil unrest taking place downtown, and so many businesses, having to windows broken and all. We boarded up 5 times, which people don't realize how expensive that is and how expensive it got. When I first did it, it was like 400 or 500 bucks. By the time we were doing it at the end, it was like 27, 2,800 bucks because there were so many people needing it, and then I remember people sort of saying at the time, well, just insurance will cover it. And to me, that's like, oh, you don't know anything about business at all, because guess what? Your insurance one will have a certain you know uh limit on what they'll cover. Civil unrest, many of them don't even cover at all. And then even if they do, you're going to have a deductible. So and the windows in that space were enormous. Each one was going to, I literally looked it all up so I could find out. It was going to cost me 8 to 900 per window, and we have 22 of them. So it was very worrying. So I was quick to put wood up. Now, the good aspect was that it was amazing. People were literally coming in there with wood on the windows, a mask on their faces, and buying art. We had so many people moving into the area, and so things were still good. I'm really grateful for that. I was grateful. I always look over all the members, and when they sell a work, in fact, we have a little inner communication system for each other, where whenever a work is sold, everybody instantly gets to know, and we do little cheers and shout outs and all that kind of stuff. So because it really heartened me, and because if they do good, then CMAC does good. And I always worry about, hey, anybody's having a problem or issue, and I desperately try to figure out what can we all do to be of help along that line. uh it was a problem in the beginning too. I did have to point out a few times that, hey, this, I named it a collective, it's not a cooperative, because you do have a lot of personnel, so things had to fall into place. Everybody had to get comfortable with what to do, what maybe not to do, step on each other's toes. And then monetarily, it's like, oh my goodness, in the first couple of years, it's like every time I turned around, it's like, I didn't know we had to pay for fire inspections. I thought they just showed up and told you what was wrong, or I didn't know you got to pay for that. There was all kinds of stuff, like just getting insurance on work. I couldn't invite guest artists in, especially ones that have works in museums and all that, and tell them, well, if something happens, sorry. So I had to get insurance to cover all that. It's not easy to get insurance to cover artwork. So I have special coverages for that, and there's always seemed to be some crazy little thing that I didn't see coming. That's like, oh my gosh, okay, we've got to do this, we got to do that. Setting up, the whole sales center that we do for everybody was a very complicated system. Just a lot of things were coming at all the time. The banking, how to, I set it up as an LLC, and which meant lawyers and all that fun stuff, and lots of leases and subleases and all the things that I kind of hate to deal with. And I was stressed out of my head, and each time I was thinking, all right, I'm ready to bow out of this. This is way more than I thought, blah blah blah. And then it seemed like we've just started to fall into place. And again, like I said, especially with so many of them turning into such really great friends, they're helping along and seeing sometimes when there was a problem, or that I was too stressed out of my head. I mean, they weren't just not giving a darn that people were really trying to help me out and things like that. So here we are. We just finished up our third year and going into our fourth year, and all that stuff, and see whether we can keep it rolling along.
I love that. I'm like, I also left my corporate well-paying job December 2019, so I feel your pain because it was like, here we go, professional artist career and COVID. Um, so that was definitely challenging. Also, coming from a business background, a lot what you're saying resonates because that's something that I got lucky in business school and took entrepreneurship classes or small business classes. And some of them were exactly what you were talking about, inspections and government forms. And I mean, it was boring as heck, don't get me wrong, but that is something that perhaps, especially folks that are trying to pursue an artistic career, don't necessarily know about. You have to balance those sheets, and how are you going to keep track of your taxes? Like, there's a lot more involved on the business side luckily there are educational programs now that people can take. Triangle Artworks comes to mind, by the way, where they have like training for that. But yeah, there's a lot of that, and I'm glad I'm glad that you mentioned it, 'cause especially if there's any artist out there that's like, "Ooh, I'm just gonna, other galleries don't like my experience, unlike you, go, I'm gonna open my own." It's like, yes, but there's a lot more involved with it than just trying to get a couple of people together and rent and then hope people show up the door and buy. So, thank you for sharing the real story behind what goes on in a collective gallery, which, like I said, it's slightly different than other types of galleries. Now, something I'm curious about, Paris, now going into your fourth year, which congratulations, of course. What is your, let's just call it your overarching, bird's eye view, if you will, vision for CMAC moving forward? I know, of course, that things can change. Hopefully, no other pandemics in the horizon. So there's a lot of things we can't predict, of course, but ideally, where would you like to see CMAC go next?
Yeah, although there is a meteor apparently passing close by Earth in the next week or so, so
Okay.
I for anything per se. Um, I had some real specific things that I wanted to see us get involved in. That with all those other things that were going on, my attention wasn't able to get to. I really want to expand out our classes. Because one of the things I talked to the artist members as well about is I deliberately left that this big open sort of uh, courtyard area in the center with some very large tables and all that. And I had the idea leaving that open for teaching classes for some of these members to be able to teach classes. And Eric has taught a whole bunch. He got right into that. Some of the other members had gotten real busy with other aspects of their life, and now they're starting it to come onto it. Anapodris is getting ready to teach some classes there. I'd love to see that sort of really take off, and I'm trying to really tighten that up. And I think the CMAC as an entity could be more helpful with that. We'll maybe add some of that to our website and things like that. Because as you can probably tell from as we're getting ready for this, I am not like super tech savvy. I mean, I do like my Apple products, mainly because they talk to each other. I can come home and it can automatically load my pictures and all that kind of stuff. Uh, but so I have someone else doing those things, and I want to have that mandate sort of go out that we really start talking about more of the classes that'll go on. I had gosh, over 2.5 years ago, I purchased a big pull down screen and a really fantastic projector that is Wi-Fi and digitally enabled. I really have a vision of one of the things that I used to do for myself when I was making a presentation is I would break out a projector, and show images and all that of works that I've done in installations. I want all the artists there to be able to do that. I wanted them to be able to bring a client in and boom, they could see it. Like, I mean, this the screen I got, I think if I remember off the top of my head, is about 10 by 14 feet. So I want it to just be like boom. As well as I want to do some other things. There's a number of the artists there that have had Kate Werner does these big, almost stained glass like paintings and all that. Her work was used as part of a ballet. I'd love to have that going on. I'd love to have like on a first Friday we pull down this thing and have some different things going on. I'd love to do like a movie night. I was thinking, with literally avant-garde movies sort of playing up there. And then along with that, I'd love to start having maybe some poetry reading. I'd love to get more involved with the community a whole lot to engage with the space and have a lot more going on and a lot more options, which again, especially when we had COVID, it's like you couldn't even touch on any of those things. And so that's where I'd like to go into the future is finally getting, we really need to engage the public a lot more than we even have. I'm not, resting on whatever laurels that we've had so far, because I think there's so much more that we could possibly do. And we're going to really be trying to get that rolling.
Absolutely love that. Basically activating the space. I was seeing your website may need updates, no judgment, but the CMAC website is fantastic and actually has a lot on it about like things you guys are looking forward to and how it's not just your regular, okay, maybe this is kind of stereotypical, but not your regular sterile kind of white gallery space that doesn't have a lot of personality. Instead, CMAC is like active and it's vibrant and there's a lot going on and it's not this hoity-toity, place that you don't want to go into. On the contrary, you're walking by, you're getting pizza from Vic's or coming from Art Space for First Friday, and it's like, "Oh, I'm just gonna drop in there, see what's new." It's a very inviting place. I mean, it's kind of magical how you struck that balance. So as the next door neighbors to CMAC, very excited to see what else is coming on and, getting in there and interacting more. But as we come towards the end, Paris, some of the questions we like to ask every guest, one of them is, how do you define success as an artist?
I used to have a set way of defining that, and I don't think it's changed a whole lot. But basically, if you're able to keep doing what you're doing and no one's coming taking away your toys, you've been successful. Yeah, if you're able to do the work that inspires you, if you're able to get through every day, pay your bills, have a decent life, I think that you are an absolute success. The chances of any one of us, becoming the next Andy Warhol or what have you, is minuscule. But you also have to have a certain drive for that, which I think you give up a lot of other aspects of your life. And I've known some people who are just absolutely fanatic. They are applying for this and that, 20 times a day. I'm the type, I'm not so sure I've even applied for a grant. It's not in my wheelhouse. It's not what floats my boat. And as you saw with like my website is like, yeah, I focus so much on CMAC that so I noticed some of the pages are down and haven't worked, in a couple of years. Maybe people will point it out. So I'm going to try and take care of that. But yeah, overall, for if your successes, have you been able to do the things you love to do in life? Not that it doesn't have challenges, not that you aren't like screaming and ranting and raving like a lunatic at times, but in the end, if you're able to live the life that you envision for yourself, man, that's a success.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, what is one piece of advice that you wish you had heard before you got started on your creative journey?
Uh, buy land. Yeah, and I say that joking, but it really is something that has come back to sort of haunt me a little bit. I have again that same studio that I've had for many years, and very lucky that I had known the architect who owns the property as well as some of the surrounding property, and he's been just I basically consider him a patron of the arts to have let me stay there that long and that. But I remember, especially when I was first getting married, I had already envisioned this place I was going to move out into the countryside, especially with some workshops and being able to do that because I didn't have any problem. When I started carving right outside my house in Durham, I loved it. I would just be anytime I wanted to, just boom, right there and do that. I don't have any problems with being distracted. I mean, I could shut out everything, that compartmentalizing aspect. Uh, so I was looking to go get some land out in the countryside and just build a big studio. And really, not. I was literally thinking about just getting a trailer or a double wide, putting it on the property and doing my thing. And then lo and behold, I got married and I had children, and my wife was like, "We're not taking our children out to the well, where are they going to go to school, and all that kind of stuff." And there's some regrets about that, but not really. I mean, things have worked out really great. But what advice I would have taken was to really, because I've run into some sculptors who are like, "You're still renting a space." It is a bit crazy when I think about all the money that I've spent on that over the years. It does seem crazy, but you know what? It's almost back to the other question about being what do you consider a success? Hey, it all worked. It's all working for me. I feel good about things. I'm able to do what I want, where I want. I've got my own little, triangle of places from home to carving studio to, CMAC and art space. And it all worked. I think someone from the outside would be like, that's an enormous amount of money being circled around in a place when you should have just like got a piece of land and went somewhere. And I run into some of these other guys who are always telling me, why didn't you go buy this piece of land and all that? I should have did it a long time before, and maybe the schools would be just perfect, which a lot of them in the areas that I'm that I was thinking about are happen to be the best schools now in North Carolina. But yeah, other advice wise, uh, I don't know offhand if I remember any like earth-shattering thing. It was more of observations, observing some people I thought were doing things the right way, and some who I thought, well, gee, I'm not going to get into that type of thing. And one of the things that really struck me is how dedicated some people are. And I realized that, if I'm going to do this, I need to really be dedicated. And so that really helped. And again, going back to that whole friends and that the ones that I saw being successful are the ones that just nonstop work, work, work. And so that I took some silent advice in that way. The sun
Okay, absorbing advice by taking advice by saying other people's trajectories. I mean, that's really smart anyways. But going back to the land thing, I agree. And I'm on there's the saying, we love sayings, as you can tell. What is it? Best time to plant an apple tree was 20 years ago. Next best time is today. So hey, you never know. If you find a good piece, maybe just save it and you can figure out what to do with it later. But I'm glad it worked out. Same here. I'm like, my dream, I keep telling my husband, I'm like, I just want some off the grid cabin with internet though. Up in up somewhere near Asheville Mountains. It doesn't have to be fancy. I just want to paint all the time and make ceramics and just have a good time. But anyways, that's on the bucket list. And for that, we'll need land. Um, back to the land conversation. But if someone randomly hands you $100 right now, Paris, what would you splurge it on or invest in? It has to be something that brings you joy and relates to your art or business.
Oh boy. Since it'd be hard to find a piece, I love art. I'm looking at, I could easily say, I don't know, 40 or 50 pieces from artists that are really dear friends, and including some artists that I just really admire. It might be hard to find a piece of artwork for $100. Uh, but another little inspiration, I think, what I would probably do with the $100 would probably go. There's a number of musicians that I'd like. I love working in music. I always got music going. Even when over at Art Space, I've got headphones on, something's rolling around. So I'd probably go ahead and yeah, buy that album 2 or 3.
That is definitely a good investment. Refueling your creative energy for sure.
For sure.
Awesome. Well, Paris, this has been so much fun. Before we go, what exciting projects do you have coming up that our listeners should know about?
Well, I had started a few years ago also getting into doing some bronze work. And I cast a few bronze pieces, and I'm looking to really turn my sights back on doing that. And maybe, gee, here we go again, go a little bit bigger. Some of the other ones that I cast were small. Uh, and I think just doing, like I talked about earlier, again, some work that I had put on the back burner for so long. Again, I'm slowing down the commissions a little bit, uh, being very particular about some things that I want to do in the future. Because one thing that I've done a lot of is every time I ordered a piece of stone for a commission, since I had to pay for a lot of times that whole tractor trailer to come, you might as well get some extra stone on it. So I wound up with like a lot of extra stone, like a lot, like many, many tens of thousands of pounds of stone. I've got Carrera marble and just gorgeous pieces of stone. I need to get cracking. I'm getting older, so I want to start hitting those. And I've literally been walking around my carving studio and writing on them with pencils what I'm thinking about for each one, and whatever one sort of slides into me. So, but I am looking to rekindle some juices in different directions.
Absolutely love that. We'll definitely have to keep an eye out for those projects. And for our listeners, how can they stay in contact with you after today's episode if they want to learn more about that project and future projects you have going on?
Yeah, I would say, since my website is such a mess right now, parisalexander.org, they can take a look at that. I'm also on Instagram as Paris Alexander Sculptor, and then also take a look at citymarketartistcollective.com to see what the whole group of us are doing, as well as myself. And but I'm going to work on getting that. That's the next thing for in the future too. Is I'll revamp my website.
Awesome. We will be sure to link all of those things in the show notes. And Paris, would you mind staying with us a few extra minutes so we can share some advice for emerging artists on the bonus segment for our podcast, of course?
Awesome. Yes.
Excellent. So for our listeners, if you want to become a podcast supporter, head on over to levelupartist.com to find out how you too can support the podcast.
And if you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share your feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can reach us through social media. I'm at May Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we are at Level Up Artists on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.